Hello and welcome back to the Baltic Sea Security Conference. For those who have joined us just recently, my name is Otto Tabuns and I am the director of the Baltic Security Foundation. We already had very interesting opening remarks as well as a fascinating panel on the defense sector with regard to the Baltic Sea region partnering nations. Now we will continue with the panel on cyber defense and cybersecurity, which is a very important and very interesting matter, not only for me, but also for many of us. And as we have seen it also during our workshops and also in general, if we look at this field in the Baltic Sea region countries, there are only so many specialists that could speak on this subject. And I'm very happy to say that we have quite a few of them on our panel today. I will start by introducing the speakers who will be joining me today. And let me first begin with Ms. Emőke Péter, who works for the European Commission, dealing with election and democracy files. And her team is in charge of coordination of the European elections and is supporting the member states with regard to online transparency, protection against cybersecurity incidents, and fighting disinformation campaigns in the context of European Parliament election. Then we have Ambassador Shota Gvineria, who is a lecturer in defense and cyber studies at the Baltic Defense College, also a partner of ours. He has previously served as the Deputy Secretary at the National Security Council of Georgia and also has been the Foreign Policy Advisor to the Defense Minister of Georgia, among other high-ranking positions in the Georgian public sphere. Furthermore, we do have Ms. Līga Raita Rozentāle, who is a Microsoft Senior Director and Team Lead for EU Cybersecurity and Emerging Threats. I do have to note, and I have to get this right, that Līga currently also serves as a special advisor to the Latvian mission to the United Nations and is a delegate for the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group on Cyber Issues. She also engages in Women for Cyber Advisory Committee and has been named by the SC Magazine UK as one of the top 50 European women in cybersecurity in the last year. Last but not least, we also do have with us Mr. Andreis Purim, who is a computer engineer specializing in cyber defense. And throughout his further studies, he focuses on two main areas, including cryptography and data science. He has provided his expertise to us at the Baltic Security Foundation, being our most notable expert on cybersecurity, and as the head of the media department of the Brazilian Association of Latvian Culture, will be able to provide his view not only from the other side of the Atlantic, if we look from our perspective, but also in the matters that are not only so much technical, but also the ones that deal with other subjects. And I have to start by outlining these sectors, some of which have already been indicated by the areas that our speakers are specializing in. And throughout our workshops and discussions, we have outlined the different facets of cybersecurity that are important to all of us and have far more than just implications for the military. As we have to speak about the importance of critical infrastructure, the financial system and energy sector, if we talk about very practical matters. But no less important are the issues of digital democracy, the matters of digital economy, as well as information security. This also goes very well together with the competency of decision makers and the cooperation and the quality of cooperation between stakeholders, not only in public sector, but also if we talk about public-private partnerships. So with this, I will give the floor to our eminent speakers to give their opening statement with regard to the fields that they care most about, and we'll try to put in a setting so that we can understand what of that is most relevant to the Baltic Sea security aspects. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Emőke Péter to start with the look from the European Commission, the matters of election and the things that you are most interested in. Please.
Fantastic. Okay, so let me just go back 1 year. and reflect about the Commission report on the latest European election and what we have found and what are our main measures. So the Commission report on the latest European elections found that the 2018 European elections were the most digital European elections. Almost half of the EU citizens rely now on online news as their main source for information about national and EU politics. And most EU citizens, while agreeing that online social networks are the modern way to keep up to date with politics, they also believe that online political information cannot be trusted. Of course, social media is an important tool for politicians to reach voters and for citizens to interact and contribute to the debate, but they have brought also new challenges. For instance, elections around the world have become target for manipulative attempts from various actors, both state and non-state actors, and the 2019 European parliamentary elections were no exception, because manipulative efforts recurrently focused on political sensitive topics and targeted EU citizens ahead of the election. Yet it's important to mention that no large-scale covert interference operation in the election have been identified. The feedback from member states show that the election package and other EU measures had an essential role in their efforts to prevent threats. Member states largely implemented the election package, which is, for those who don't know, a package of measures which was issued in 2018 September to support free and fair European elections. They achieved high-level cooperation and coordination both among member states and within EU institutions, and also internally among relevant competent authorities, and also with private and other concerned entities. Ahead of the election, the Commission worked with member states to implement its recommendation to manage the risk of cyber attacks in election, and it invited member states to take appropriate steps to understand and manage the risk of cyber attacks and to apply the compendium on cybersecurity of the election technology. Member states and political parties were also asked to take steps to raise awareness of such risk, and many did, including by organizing specific trainings and exercising involving relevant stakeholders. And to support the implementation of the recommendation and to enhance cooperation between different national authorities, the Commission organized a high-level workshop on cyber threats ahead of the election back in October 2018. Where cybersecurity authorities met with election authorities to discuss the upcoming challenges. And later, the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, in cooperation with the Parliament and with the Commission, conducted a tabletop exercise in April 2019, the framework of the European Cooperation Network of Election, which is a network of national authorities, coordinated on EU level, and they tested the effectiveness of the EU and member state responses and crisis plans. In this framework, member states indicated that the transmission of the results of the to the Parliament on the election night could be improved. And in some cases, authorities provided specific assistance and trainings to political parties and also to candidates, as well to journalists and to media to support cybersecurity and resilience in the elections. So this would be a summary in the first part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emőke. This has been a very important introduction to what matters in this field, especially when we talk about elections and political participation. And this also gives the overview of what matters for the public sector, if we talk about authorities, both national ones and also the supranational ones. Now, I would like to see a perspective from the private sector and to see how this aspect and other priorities matter for the private sector stakeholders. And for this, I would like to ask Ms. Rozentāle to share her views on this.
Good morning to everyone participating, and good morning to Otto. who failed to say the most important part of my CV is that we are former colleagues at the Ministry of Defense in Latvia. So I hope you can send some greetings to all of our colleagues there. But moving on, I wanted to thank the Baltic Security Foundation and the other organizers to invite us to this event. It's quite timely to include the private sector in these discussions, as technology is very much in convergence with issues of defense and security these days. And I would actually be happy to just respond to Emőke's comments, as we have also been very involved in ensuring election security from the technology standpoint, and also following through in the previous years on election security and disinformation issues that affect the elections. But first, I'll say some other issues on more general note about how Microsoft works in this space. And as Otto already mentioned, I do work on government affairs for Europe. So my perspective is certainly how we can cooperate as the private sector with the government on very strategic level issues, rather than more detailed operational or technical issues, which of course Microsoft has a high interest in. But from my perspective, I'll start with more the strategic level issues. So, you know, we're here to talk about the Baltic Sea region, but it's very important to put into context the issues that are ongoing globally and how the Baltic Sea region fits into that perspective. It's very timely that we're having this discussion, because many international organizations are specifically addressing cybersecurity, technology, and emerging threats in their discussions these days. For instance, yesterday, or let me say a few months ago at the start of COVID, the Secretary General of NATO appointed a group to reflect on the NATO 2030 strategy. And this certainly looks on how technology and innovation will influence security and defense in the transatlantic space. And this group released a report yesterday. And it's very interesting to note that 138 extensive recommendations this group made to reflect on how the Secretary General could implement his idea of NATO 2030 very much involve the private sector. So it's definitely the case that NATO will have to address this interaction in the future. Also, 2 weeks ago, the EU published Council conclusions on the urgency to address cybersecurity and emerging technology, and we hope that the next presidency will address these issues at the Foreign Affairs Council or different councils. So very much looking forward to that. And also, I'm sure Emőke knows that today we hope to have a European democracy action plan that I predict will certainly address the role of technology in disinformation and election security. So certainly extend an invitation to speak about that separately. Also, the UN is playing a very important part, as the first committee has 2 groups currently looking at cybersecurity and on building the peace and security and the implications of nation-state use of ICTs. And as Otto mentioned, I do advise the Latvian government on this issue, as I've had close cooperation in my governmental role in the past on these issues. So looking at various international organizations, not yet the Baltic region specifically, all of these discussions involve the private sector. So why? How do we see this from our side? You know, we can look currently at COVID and how 2020 has tested the entire world, and how technology has become even more a part of our lives. And so when you look at legislation or strategies, it's the issue of how critical is the digital sector. And on the EU level, that certainly is addressed through legislation. And we're very much looking forward to the cybersecurity package that the Commission will release in the middle of December. But we also have to look at how we cooperate and how fundamental values fit into these discussions about emerging technology. And for Microsoft, that means supporting a more secure, green and inclusive economic recovery during COVID right now, among other things. And building trust is a big part of that. So we often look at how we can supplement the discussions on governments and their behavior in cyberspace, and how we can build that trusted ecosystem. We look at this from the perspective of a company who very much monitors global incidents in our cloud services. So in September, we released a digital defense report that was looked very much at the current trends and threats in cyberspace. This report makes it clear that what we are seeing is a rapidly increased sophistication over the past year. And that's nothing new. This sophistication increases every year. And these techniques are even harder to spot, and they threaten even those who are the most prepared for these attacks. For example, nation states are engaging in new reconnaissance techniques that increase their chances of compromising high-value targets. Criminal groups are targeting businesses and have moved criminal business to the cloud. And they hide among legitimate services, and attackers have developed always new ways to scour the internet for systems vulnerabilities to use for ransomware. Also, there's an increasing focus on IoT devices. For instance, IoT threats are constantly abandoning and evolving, and we see a 35% increase in total attack volume just in this year compared to last year, and that's specifically only on IoT devices. So while we can talk about lots of statistics, Microsoft has certainly a high visibility on these attacks. We have over 350 professionals working on cybersecurity alone, and we spend more than 1 billion euros annually to combat these threats and attacks. We also look to see how we can focus on what needs to be done on the sort of more political level and strategic level. One of our biggest initiatives is working with over 1,000 partners on the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. Microsoft recognized that our products and services are being used for attacks, and that we must work with governments to have more sort of rules of the road in this space. So 2 years ago, the French government proposed a Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. And we were, let's say, almost first in line to sign up for these 9 principles of responsible behavior in cyberspace and addressing challenges on multiple levels. And we've continued over the last 2 years to work with these partners and with others who have not necessarily endorsed this call to see how cooperation, either regionally, locally, globally, can be made to implement these 9 principles under this call. So looking at the region, we've had several roundtables in Finland and Estonia and Latvia, some of those digital, some of those not digital, also involving Sweden and Estonia, Sweden and Lithuania, excuse me, and also discussions in Poland as well, if you think about the region on a wider basis, and to try to figure out what can be done also regionally. And these discussions are varied. People have not always a high awareness for all of the details and all of the small things that can lead up to bigger accomplishments in cyberspace. So we work step by step with endorsers to see how Microsoft can be a partner on whether it's securing critical infrastructure, addressing election security, looking at intellectual property in this space and violations. We think that we work with the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, which is a cooperation of over 100 companies, many of which are in the region, to address how companies should look at, how the private sector should look at hacking back in cyberspace and how that should be addressed collectively. We use these kind of avenues to leverage our expertise to contribute to identifying opportunities and finding solutions to these challenges. I'm happy to keep talking and going on, but we certainly recognize that as emerging disruptive technologies play a large role in defense and security, and the interest of the tech sector will only grow in this space. We look at, from my part of Microsoft, at implementing practical projects that will look at ways to actually achieve these higher level principles, whether they be on election security or critical infrastructures and so on, and how that could add globally to more increased cybersecurity. I fondly remember back in 2015 that during the Latvian presidency of the EU, we promoted a cyber hygiene pledge for ministries of defense. And so all 3 Baltic countries and Finland, now it escapes me which other countries, but the External Action Service, the European Defense Agency, all got together and signed a cyber hygiene pledge. That was a long time ago when even the concept of cyber hygiene was not even understood. But I think things have changed significantly. And I think that one thing that is very important in the Baltic Sea region is that there is an ecosystem of trust and stability in cyberspace among the EU member states in that area. And I think that could be built upon and projected externally for further cooperation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Līga. I think this is very important to note that with the current situation and also with the general trend of development, the technologies, especially the internet and communication technologies, do play an increasing part not only in our private lives, but also in the way how the political process is going on. So it is very important that also private players play a proactive role, and I'm very glad to see that also Microsoft is one of them. Perhaps now, if we have seen the major looks from the side of the Commission and from the side of private players such as Microsoft, I would like to ask Ambassador Gvineria to give his view, as on the one hand, he has had the wonderful position to have a side view on the way how things are happening in the Baltic region, especially in the Baltic states. At the same time, Ambassador has been in the eye of the storm by being in the Baltic Defense College and having perhaps a prime view of how these matters of cyber defense and cyber security are happening. Also, if we talk about the perspective of the 3 Baltic states, but also the question of the Baltic states and NATO and the European Union. So, Ambassador, perhaps you could share your observations now as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Otto, very much for inviting me to this very interesting panel. Actually, I will try to also start from a broader picture and then zoom down to the Baltic region, and especially in light of what Līga just mentioned with the recommendations from the experts, which was requested by the NATO Secretary General. I will also try to touch upon that from the perspective of what opportunities might be there for the Baltic states. So first of all, I will start from a statement that I see cyberspace as the most important defining factor of the contemporary security environment in the 21st century. And there are many, many experts who are saying that, okay, we are living in the most challenging and complicated and ever evolving security environment nowadays. But why? If we ask the question why, because of the oversized role of the cyberspace in many different directions that I will try to now briefly outline. Cyberspace has many, many different faces, but most importantly, cyberspace is important for security considerations because it has become a most important enabler and force multiplier for all the other hybrid threats that are happening around us. So I was listening to the previous panel, and I was also listening to the keynote speech, and I do understand that these two were the defense-oriented panels and speeches, but still, being part of that debate for years myself, I think that we are over-focusing on the conventional threat here. I understand it is very scary to have a very aggressive neighbor with a very aggressive posture, and especially after what Russia did in Georgia in 2008 and what they did in Ukraine and are still doing, with the annexation of Crimea, etc. Of course, the conventional threat cannot be and should not be underestimated. However, in the shadow of that conventional threats, we do not have to forget that in the first place, Russia chooses hybrid warfare and different elements of hybrid warfare because they still want to operate below the threshold of conflict. So if we're actually preparing for the moment when Russian tanks will roll up to the border, or the aircraft will start, crossing the airspace, etc., that's not the type of warfare that will happen in the Baltic region anytime soon, in my understanding. The objectives that Russian Federation has at this point in the Baltic region is different, and it requires employment of different tools, and it's not conventional military for sure. So unity was mentioned a couple of times already in this conference, and cohesion was mentioned. This is exactly what Russians are trying to utilize as the main weapons, against the Baltic states and against NATO. And cyberspace actually provides a perfect environment for Russians to operate in that domain of non-conventional pressure, and put non-conventional pressure using all elements of their national power, to achieve their objectives. Also, cyberspace is a human-made domain, right? It's a technology in itself, so it's part of the critical infrastructure which has to be protected, and we have to realize that it is extremely important to have our cyberspace protected, because if we want to deny the threats that I was talking about a minute ago, then most of them, again, happen in the cyberspace, and we need to understand how to protect our cyberspace, how to be effective in protecting our cyberspace, not to make it available for the malicious activities, because now indeed I do believe, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that now the main battlefield is in the cyberspace. And also, it is a domain itself. It's a human-made domain itself, but it is vital also for the navigation of other domains as well. If you want to have any sort of domination or control or advantages in land, in sea, in air, or in the space, you first of all have to control and dominate the cyberspace. And pandemic crisis was a very good lesson for all of us to understand how important that is, and the scale and importance and sophistication of all that activities in the cyberspace just has been pushed forward with more vigorous speed, and it has been actually revitalized even further. But this trend was there anyway. It was going that direction, that everything was moving online, everything was digitalizing anyway, and cyberspace was playing more and more important role in every critical aspect of the national security or normal functioning of the society, right? So from that perspective, it cannot be underestimated how important it is for the Baltic states to have a unified policy and strategy, because for Russians, Baltic region is a one operational area, one theater. They do not have any plans or strategies for Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia differently. That's just one B3 operating area for Russia. And for the Baltic states to most effectively protect and defend themselves, especially in the cyberspace, they need to have a very, very coherent and unified policy and strategy, which will be aligned specifically in the terms of countering and deterring the threats that are coming in environment enabled in the cyberspace. And here, I think that the report that was mentioned already here provides an enormous opportunity for the Baltic states, because the Baltic states, and especially Estonia, but also the others, they have remarkable progress in digitalizing their governance systems and societies. And Estonia has long been the front runner, in NATO when it comes to cyber defense and cyber security. So it is very clearly underlined in the report by the experts that creating a common political framework on how to assess, attribute, and respond to the cyber attacks will be the key priority for NATO from now on. And there are two important aspects to that. You need to have a political framework, you need to have a legal framework, you need to have an ethical framework of what actors can and cannot do in the cyberspace. And there are two aspects also in what we as responsible actors want to do in the cyberspace. We want to be effective, but also legitimate, right? And it is a challenge because on the other side, we have a totally irresponsible and reckless actor, which does not care about the rules and uses every opportunity to harm us and to use cyberspace for malicious activities. This is why we're talking about this huge Russian cyber threat. Otherwise, Russia is not a cyber power. It's not a great cyber power or cyber superpower. It is lagging behind in technology. It is lagging behind in terms of developing the software or the hardware. It cannot produce anything meaningful in that regard. And the only reason why we think of Russia as a cyber power is because they are very active, very aggressive, reckless, irresponsible, and they are actually creating a lot of fuss and threat and malicious activities there in the cyberspace. So there is a great pattern for how to respond to that in that document, which probably will turn into a NATO strategic concept 2030 very soon. So I would encourage the Baltic states really to use that opportunity and take leadership role within the alliance to lead this process and to be to play a front runner role there. But first, they need to do their homework and align their own policy and strategy frameworks a little bit better than they do at this point. So I will stop here now, and then I will be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think this is also a very important perspective on how things look from the Baltic side, also in the context of NATO, which is the key of our security and defense, specifically when we talk about the three Baltic states. But as you mentioned, this is much more than a technical issue, and this really does affect the effective functioning of the society. And as we can see, on the one hand, we do have the European Union framework. On the other hand, we have the NATO framework. At the same time, if we talk about the societies of the countries of the Baltic Sea region, we also have to remember those parts of the societies that are part of the political process, yet are not physically within either the European Union or the NATO sphere. And here we can talk about the citizens of these countries who live, for example, now in the United Kingdom, which is no more a member of the European Union, or if we talk about the wider diaspora of peoples of the Baltic Sea, such as those in the Americas. And for this, I would like to give the floor to our cybersecurity expert, Mr. Andreis Purim, to give his perspective both of what he has seen in Brazil and also reflect how this affects matters of election and informational security and what are the key challenges there. Please.
So hello everybody, I hope you can hear me well. My introduction will be brief, I hope. So it is a great honor to be here amongst the top minds of cybersecurity in the Baltic region, in Georgia, and in Europe. And it's an even greater honor to represent the Baltic Security Foundation in this webinar. As you know, the Baltic Security Foundation is quite young, but we've gone head-on cybersecurity. We've joined the many observers and non-state actors in this area. And now a little bit about me. I'm a part of a team for a little bit more than a year now. And being a programmer by vocation, I work more closely in practical terms than political ones. So I always bring a little bit more of hacking, of cryptography into the discussion that is usually about policy, to try to mitigate this gap between practical realities and the ideal laws and policies we have. About the Baltic states. The Baltic states are this exquisite environment of cybersecurity, as you probably noticed. Because not long ago we were part of the Soviet Union, and now we are tech hubs in Europe. But this brings a lot of new situations that don't happen anywhere else in the world. We have a very different workforce. We have a very different industrial sector. Our infrastructure is still part very new and part very Soviet. So as Līga mentioned, the people want satisfaction. They are European citizens. They want e-governments. They want efficient programs. They want a good, stable democracy. And this means that we'll have many challenges. We've succeeded so far, despite the problems, but those challenges will keep mounting for the future, and it's up to us to rise up and stand to them. So about those problems, these challenges themselves, and the part I will speak about. So how can they be? Trolls, hackers, disinformation, hybrid warfare, structural takeover. The problems Latvia faces are many. But make no mistake, we in cybersecurity, we're not only protecting systems or softwares or programs or technicalities. No, we are here to protect institutions. We're here to protect our people. We're here to protect our democracy. And there's no higher calling than that. So in my case, in 2018, I had the chance to be part of the volunteer working in the Latvian parliamentary elections in Brazil. And because we have a somewhat large diaspora here, and in my experience, it was very good to understand not only how the Latvian government faces security and democracy, but also how the Latvian people understand it as this general abstract idea. So, as you may know, the Latvian elections are made with paper ballots. You go there, you check and put it on the voting booth. The problem is, as you may guess, is that it takes a long time for us to send those papers to Latvia, and they go through unreliable channels. They go to post mails, international post. They have to reach Latvia, etc., etc., etc. So the solution for these votes that come from Brazil, Canada, Australia, and other parts of Europe, the UK, for example, is to have this software in the voting booths operated by the volunteers that will put the votes in the end after the count, and the government will have the results of the election, a little bit in advance, and they will compare it to the ballots when they come. And of course, as you may know, using the internet is not always reliable. This data can be intercepted. This data could be changed with man-in-the-middle attacks. So the solution employed by the Latvian government was quite smart. I didn't have a lot of time to work with the software, but it was very good with cryptography. But it also highlighted another problem we face, that is society itself. We need to trust those softwares. We need to trust those systems we're using. Because as the day of the elections happened, a lot of news came in of Latvian websites being hacked. And as people were voting, we from the volunteer team would often take a time to look at the news on our smartphones and see if nothing terrible was happening, and it quite was. So the thing is, we need to understand that we will never have the most secure, the impassable software ever. Everything can be hacked. Everything can be vulnerable. It only takes time to hack something. And the problem is we need to conciliate the inherent flaws, the inherent problems of software, of coding, which happens. Codes are made by people. People make mistakes. People forget, leave vulnerabilities, or use outdated code that has more vulnerabilities than ever. And we have to conciliate this real problem about code with people. We need to conciliate this with governments. We need to, like our policies, we need to keep revising and updating everything. So about the elections itself, around that time, there was, I have been working with the Brazilian Cultural Association since 2014. And we, from the outside perspective of Europe, the news, the new channels we often receive are often unreliable. Brazil, for example, has a big influence of Russian channels. So Russian news, Russian state media. And what happened in 2014, 2015, as the Euromaidan was occurring in Ukraine, is that I often remember going into Facebook and seeing memes propagated even sometimes by official Russian accounts, official governmental accounts, about how Ukraine was somehow rebelling and was somehow wrong in having its Euromaidan revolution. So it shows a little bit that the entire discussion of cybersecurity is much more nuanced because it involves people and involves problems that sometimes we cannot even begin to understand. And that was 2015. In 2018, there was similar problems with deep fakes. Russian media started, for some reason, interfering with American elections, of course, and there were 2016, I forgot the year. And there were deep fakes of political candidates, not the presidential ones, but the front runners of the parties, of deep fakes of them saying things they did not say. And that was a very, very troublesome time because people will often believe the first thing they see on the internet, unfortunately. But that is really the end point of my discussion. We have a lot of vulnerabilities, we'll have a lot of challenges, and we'll face them, hopefully, and win.
Andreis, I think your remarks very well qualify the statements that we heard also from Ambassador Gvineria with regard to the society, and also I think it underlines what was mentioned at the beginning by Ms. Péter and Ms. Rozentāle about the efforts and the interests that have been outlined from the major public and private sector players, as well as the discussion of values and the discussion of what the recovery and the principles of these strategies for recovery should be in the future. As we still have some time for discussion and questions, perhaps first of all, I would like to ask whether any of the panelists would like to respond to any of the other panelists. So perhaps I may start this discussion by asking Ms. Emőke Péter, if we look from the position of the European Commission, and if we look what is important for the European citizens, has the Commission considered or planned for these issues when we do engage European citizens in the political process who do physically are outside of the European Union, and is that also a factor when considering both the public and public-private responses to different challenges that we have for this election process?
Okay, thank you. I try to be brief. In terms of the citizens, I am sure that you are aware of the Future of Europe conference, and this will be a major initiative which is trying to include as many as possible citizens and civil society actors in the decision making. And I would like to reflect already Līga mentioned that we are adopting today the European Democracy Action Plan, which includes a legislative proposal to ensure greater transparency of paid political advertising alongside with non-legislative measures. And this action plan seeks also to empower citizens and civil society to counter any threats to democracy and proposing measures to enhance the safety of journalists. And ensuring transparency and accountability is essential in this context. The action plan is aligned therefore with the Digital Services Act, as it was mentioned earlier, which will deepen the internal market and clarify the responsibilities for digital services, including in particular the online intermediaries, which play an important role as gateways for information. And it will be also published in parallel with our citizenship report, which will include also measures to promote inclusive participation. And I would like to take here the opportunity and thank for Microsoft for the contribution to the public consultation on the European Democracy Action Plan, which was really useful for us. Thank you.
Perhaps I may also give a floor once again to Ms. Rozentāle and to comment more on what is the perspective of Microsoft towards these developments, especially if we talk about election security and possible ways for cooperation. It may also be the matter of regulation and the positive and more challenging sides of these activities, both from the perspective of the national government and also perhaps of some of the international organizations. Līga, would you have something to add to this?
Yeah, sure. You're welcome, Emőke, for the public consultation input. I urge you not to have public consultations in the middle of the summer anymore to ruin vacations, but that's a different story. A few of those going on this summer. In any case, I wanted to reflect on a few things on the election security issue. As Andreis mentioned, that when you look at the Latvian elections and the paper balloting, there's always some electronic reporting component. Even if they manage to make it through the mail, there is the accounting and registration in the State's voting commission. I'm not sure what it's, I can't think of what it's called in English, but at some point in the line, there will be some electronic component, and how do you protect that particular component is quite important, even if you're using paper ballots. Microsoft has been working a lot in the US elections where the voting systems are much more electronic. However, there the issue is that every locality, every region has the ability to use whatever technology it wants to have their voting. So that how do you make more universally applicable technology for security when different systems are required? So in the US, we've had the experience of working on a product called Election Guard, which we tried to cooperate with those manufacturers of those voting machines to ensure end-to-end security for those particular votes, and voters can see that their vote has been counted. That's one way. We've worked extensively with various candidates in US elections, other elections around the world, to ensure that their emails are secure. One of the ways that we've seen is that email gets hacked. It's quite, I mean, it's a simple attack, but the people working on elections are severely vulnerable. I mean, if you go back to the 2016 elections, where Hillary Clinton certainly had these problems, from there we started focusing more and more specifically on how the highest level of email protection can be granted to candidates and their families, whether or not they're Microsoft customers, so that this vulnerability was also addressed. We've also extended that service to journalists, to human rights workers, to organizations focusing on democracy. And that has been rolling out continuously throughout the world. As soon as if legally allowed in various countries. Election guard is currently limited to the US, but we are looking at different areas in which this kind of end-to-end security verification is possible. Further, we work a lot on, and we'll, as soon as the European Democracy Action Plan is out, we'll take a look to see if we can return to trainings, informative sessions, looking at combining our views on not only the technology that goes into elections and how that affects candidates or other organizations that work on issues surrounding elections. Also looking at sort of the foreign interference and disinformation angle. Andreis also mentioned the issue of deep fakes. Microsoft is working on Microsoft Video Authenticator so that it's easily identifiable to see if videos have been tampered with. We've worked with different academic institutions to address the issue of deep fakes and finding technology that's easily available to distribute and address deep fakes so that it doesn't become an issue. There have not been a huge proliferation of deep fakes as perhaps there was concerns about. Maybe this is something that we have been able to stay ahead of a little bit. So hopefully that's the case. In any way that we can consider, we try to look at elections, whether it be working with governments to secure particular infrastructures during an election and afterwards. We've done this in various different countries, starting from the Warsaw NATO summit to various elections around the world, in Europe and in the EU. What else could I say about this topic? I'll stop now. It's something that definitely we're concerned about. We follow kind of the cyclical approach to elections. The European Parliament elections were certainly critical to us. And so this past year was much more emphasis on the US side. But I think the lessons learned in different areas will help us move forward and supplement the Commission's work on the European Democracy Action Plan from our side.
Thank you very much, Līga. I think one of the most notable points that you outlined is the question of awareness and involvement of people who are in charge of this. So because it is not only technologies, but as Ambassador Gvineria mentioned, it is always the human factor is there, and those systems are of course created by humans themselves. So I would like to ask Ambassador to comment more, as you have had the experience to lecture on these topics at the Baltic Defense College, and you had had the chance to communicate with different stakeholders, people who are working on these issues. Could you please comment on what are the key issues or the key moments if we talk about awareness of the people who are in charge of these issues, and in which areas there could be something more done that would contribute to the overall state of the cybersecurity and also the cooperation with this regard between the Baltic partners?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. And this is, I guess, the question which still remains in the center of the discussion, because unfortunately, cyber defense, cybersecurity, and the hybrid threats in general remains to be an area of uncertainty. And even among the expert community, which is working on the daily basis on the issues, there is no universal understanding of almost anything that is going on in the cyberspace. You know, it's very difficult to come to any sort of universal conclusions or agreements or definitions of things. And there are different actors who are looking at the problem from different perspectives, and they're using cyberspace for different reasons to achieve different objectives. And this is why these universal agreements are very difficult to reach. But now, actually, even among the alliances, you know, in the alliances such as NATO, such as European Union, it is often difficult to come to some sort of universal understandings as well, to leave alone, you know, the worldwide or sort of wider achievements in sort of standardizing code of conduct or way of thinking about cyber defense and cyber security. And there are different actors within the European Union and within NATO that view things differently. You know, for example, I mean, there is a great example about the offensive cyber capabilities. Offensive cyber capabilities is something that is quite toxic within the European Union. You can hardly talk about that. Also, NATO is, by its nature, a defensive alliance. So when it comes to offensive cyber capabilities, many people react differently to that. But certainly there are members of NATO and members of the European Union which have an offensive cyber doctrine, and then they develop offensive cyber capabilities. I personally, as an expert, think that there is nothing wrong in that, but actually, the awareness, even among the expert community, varies, the level as well as understanding of different things. It varies most definitely in the policy making circles, and it varies in the societies and population. So now what this pandemic crisis once again brought upon us is that more uncertainty actually creates more possibilities for more malicious actions in the information ecosystem. So there is more space for disinformation, misinformation, for conspiracy theories, for the myth, you know, and the revisionist actors such as Russia, such as China, they do benefit greatly from all that. And we have to double down at least our efforts of educating our societies, you know, that there are whole structures created in Russia and in China which are aimed at dividing us, at polarizing us, at giving us different understanding of things based on our emotions. They make us ignore the facts on the ground. They make us disregard facts and evidences and take decisions based on our emotionally driven, you know, buttons that they know of. So it is very, very important to actually invest much more into the awareness of all those techniques of how they're doing it and bring it to the wider public, bring it to the attention of experts, bring it to the attention. And the key there is that this should be a comprehensive effort, really. No government or no private sector or no non-governmental sector can deal with that alone in isolation. In the first place, there should be a cooperation across the sectors, and the government should be leading the effort, fully supported by the private sector and the non-governmental sector. And then we should bring it on a regional level, such as the B3 cooperation on that. And then we should bring it to the wider levels like EU and NATO. And then, only then we will be able to effectively bring it to the international level. And this is really the step-by-step approach we have to very scrupulously follow here, in my understanding.
It is indeed very important to see that we do have a comprehensive response, and even if our opponents would look at the region as a single operational area, it would be indeed funny when an offensive action happens and they find out that actually their premise does not work because you have so many different perspectives. So perhaps there is some tactical value to that. At the same time, of course, jokes aside, it is a serious matter that has to be considered not only by nations themselves, but also by the organizations. Perhaps my last question in this discussion would be to Andreis with regard to what you have just heard from our colleagues, and for you as a European citizen who has the double trouble of participating in the political process at the same time physically being outside of Europe and the European Union. of the things that you heard, what would be the priorities for you as a member of the European community, as a European citizen and participant of this process? What would be the things that you would expect from either the European Commission or major private sector holders or other international organizations? What would be your wish list? What would be the most important for you?
Sorry, can you hear me? Excuse me?
Yes. Andreis, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. It's because we're having a little storm outside.
Oh.
So
hope you're safe.
I'll first say thanks to Līga for the comments. I know Microsoft. I know some of the projects Microsoft is working on, although I have not. I do not have the knowledge you have on them, of course. But I think what I can gather from what Mrs. Péter, what Līga and Shota said, is that we need training, we need awareness, because as we said, hostile actors are trying to polarize our society, or trying to, attack our democracy and our values. And the thing is that it's not only we need not only awareness for the people in charge, but we need awareness for the whole society on these matters, because technology will always be disruptive. And I think what we can gather for discussion today, a small conclusion of all the comments, is that we are advancing, of course, with the help of the European Union, with the help of the Baltic Defense College, with the help of Microsoft, but there's still much work to do. And it's not only us, the panelists, but also the entire society that will have to work on this disruption technology brings. I'm so sorry, but I'd also like to hear Līga's comment on it maybe later. So that's my conclusion. Thank you, Otto.
Thank you. I think that we have had a great discussion, and I would like to thank all the panelists for outlining these very important matters when we talk about digital democracy, when we talk both about the public and the private sectors, the perspective from Brussels, and also the perspective from the Baltic states, and from beyond the Europe as a geographic unit. I think this is very important because the expertise is very limited due to the very limited amount of experts, which is also one thing that we identified when putting together the Baltic Sea Security Initiative. And so for that, I would like to thank my brilliant colleagues for doing all the job for me. It was very easy, and hopefully this discussion will serve as a great source for information for all of us who listen, and also for our further research. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all after the break in an hour. Thank you.